Hello, hello, hello! The notion that demographics are destiny has become somewhat of a meme among the online right. Indeed, with my video about Britain's bleak demographic future, I am somewhat guilty of playing into it myself. The idea is that, especially in a democracy, the power of the nation is directly proportional to the size of the nation, with democracy essentially becoming an ethnic headcount. So, those nations that have lots of children will be more powerful than those having few. From this, and in light of our birth rates being below replacement levels, there has arisen a desire among many on the right for pro-natalism, or dare I say hyper-natalism, wherein advocates claim that it is of utmost importance, or even a civilisational duty, to have as many children as you can, or at least have them in numbers far above the replacement level. Indeed, it was this tweet by Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad of the Lotus Eaters, as well as his fellow Lotus Eater Harry Robinson's response, that gave me the inspiration for this video. Because, as far as I'm concerned, the idea is that demographics are destiny and that we should each have loads of children do not hold water. Watch this then as I ask whether demographics truly are destiny or whether they need not be a priority at all. In contrast to the somewhat populist idea of demographics being destiny, I would propose that destiny is instead written primarily by the organised minority against the disorganised majority, and by the individual actions of great men of history. Firstly, the idea of great men of history is far easier to understand and far less controversial. The idea that it was, in many cases throughout history, the individual actions of great men who did the most to change the path of the future seems obvious. If it had not been for Julius Caesar or his son Octavian personally, there may not have been a Roman Empire. If it had not been for Robert Clive in India, there may not have been a British Raj. If it had not been for Cecil Rhodes, there may not have been a Rhodesia, certainly not one with the same name, and in many other cases, history pivoted on the individual actions of great men, or even men whose roles seem far less consequential. Individual soldiers, led by individual generals fighting individual battles, have massively changed the course of history. Through things like this, through the butterfly effect, and through the role of other great men of history, the course of the past was determined not by raw demographics, but by chance, skill, and individual brilliance. Then there is also the matter of elite theory. I don't wish to get into the weeds here, but the core concept is that it is always an organised minority of people who come out ahead of the disorganised majority of people. Equipped with this understanding, the best way for us to become the organised elites and thus become masters of our own destiny is to prioritise the quality of ourselves and our children, the true right-wing elite, rather than going for sheer quantity. Of course, power is not held simply by being organised in its own right. True power, the real ability to effect change, is defined in my video, The Alarming Nature of True Power. Of course, some level of true power can be harnessed from a demographic mass, so I'm not claiming that pro-natalism would be completely useless, but it is secondary to true power, it's secondary to elite theory, and it's secondary to great men of history. To give a perhaps controversial yet ironclad example, the case of Israel and Ashkenazi Jews should clearly dispel any illusion of demographics determining destiny. As far as I'm concerned, their case perfectly demonstrates that all you really need is a high level of organisation, enough competent elites, and control of a few key centres of true power. For the sake of not getting booted off of YouTube, I shan't delve too deeply into J-Pill territory and shall stick to the blindingly obvious. As even normies know, people of God's chosen nation have throughout history entered positions related to banking, media, entrepreneurialism, and other powerful fields. In America, this group controls many of the banks, funds, news broadcasters, top businesses, top political roles, top entertainment positions, and top journalistic positions. If this is the image of the regime octopus, then all of these areas can be taken as where God's chosen are strong. In these roles, as in their lives in general, God's chosen maintain extremely high cohesion and in-group preference. They don't operate as individuals in a libertarian sense, but much more like a clan or tribe in a pseudo-Darwinian sense. And so, with such high levels of control over America's most important and influential industries, this group has become dominant in the American regime, all despite numbering only around 7.5 million in America, or 2.2% of that country's population. Are you still sure that demographics are destiny now? Naturally, all of this was pretty well understood in the past. The idea that demographics are destiny is a new one, being coined in the first half of the 19th century by none other than frog philosopher Auguste Comte. So, if this was understood in the past, then what changed, and where did the recent rise of pro-natalism and hyper-natalism come from? Though there have been both pro-natalists and anti-natalists throughout history, the recent rise in pro-natalism among the right and the idea of demographics as destiny are largely reactions to the rapidly changing demographics of the white Western world and even the rest of the world more broadly. Put simply, the first and second worlds are being outbred by the third world, and pro-natalism is a reaction against that. Today, many nations are having children far below replacement levels, all whilst our first world nations are being filled with people from the second and third worlds. The native demographic collapse and simultaneous replacement are alarming to most people, and for good reason. By all analysis, these are deeply destabilising phenomena to which there does not look to be a peaceful solution. The idea that we need to reverse this by having more children is one that I can sympathise with, but if we are to truly understand the root of such a belief, at least in its modern incarnation, we need to take a brief look at the rationale behind this. As I said, recent pro-natalism is reactionary in nature. Clearly, it's reactionary to declining birth rates and mass immigration, as I also said, but we need to understand the claim made for why such policies are being pursued. The answer to that lies in this paper from 2003. I was going to go over that paper in this video, but it was long enough to warrant its own video, with that now being available here and in the description below. In summary, mass immigration was sold as the only viable way to prop up the state pension in light of a declining indigenous population. For reasons outlined in my video, How Britain's Capitalists Subdued the Common Man Part 2, the alternatives given to cut back pensions or let wages rise were not considered viable or reasonable, or at least they weren't presented as such. What this means for the reactionary hyper-natalists, though, is that this is the economic lie that they are reacting to. The idea that society can only be supported by fueling massive population growth. They generally accept wholesale the lies of this paper and share the belief in the idea that without a sufficient supply of working people, native or foreign, there would be economic decline and the system would become unsustainable. This analysis, with its assumptions, may indeed be correct, but hyper-natalists tend to also disregard or overlook the possibility of systemic reform. In effect, they think that rather than seeking to change the system, we should try to solve the problem it creates in accordance with the false assumptions given to us by those agents of Blairism, meaning that they are trapped within the Blairite frame. Though, of course, this frame doesn't inform the entirety of pro-natalist thought, it does inform the bulk of pro-natal economic assumptions. As I say in my last video, the rationale behind mass immigration, the fact that many migrants are known to be net cost to the state, yet are still allowed in, should clearly betray the lies of the 2003 paper and should disprove the myth that more workers equals more per capita wealth. Yet, that has not entirely registered among the pro-natalist side. I do not wish to be too uncharitable to pro-natalists, of course. Many of them do understand this and base their pro-natalism on other reasons, but it is still worth bearing in mind. Having more workers does not necessarily mean more per capita wealth. Europe today is still about 8 times wealthier than India, despite having half the population. And let's not forget that Europeans, despite making up only a small proportion of the world population, came to control countries through empires far more populous than their own. So, okay, I'm happy to say that the idea that demographics are destiny has been put to bed and smothered with a pillow. What, then, of the pragmatic utility of hyper-natalism standing on its own merits, freed from the lies of Blairism? In terms of achieving the goals of the true right, our first priority needs to be to gain power. Putting aside delusion, this should be done in two ways. 1. The root of organised minorities, and 2. The root of clanship. Let's tackle elite theory first. As stated, the goal here is to form an organised minority of elites, which will then competently seek to gain true power. But, okay, where will this elite minority come from, and what's the best way to grow it? On the pro-natal side, the argument here might be one of probabilistic quality from quantity. If a couple have 2 children, they can produce at most 2 elites. If, however, they have 6 children, they can produce up to 6 new elites. However, to counter this, as anyone with a brain or relevant experience knows, it's much easier to dedicate your time to 2 or 3 children than it is to 6 or 7. Also, unless one already has abundant resources, which, let's face it, the sort of guys I'm talking about here typically don't, then the more children you have, the more your resources become strained. In fact, even if you are wealthy, the more ways you have to split your wealth, the more diluted each child's inheritance becomes. Despite this, hyper-natalists would argue that quality is more than just upbringing, and that we could expect to find more high-quality elites from a larger pool of people, even where the average quality of that pool is lower, than from a small pool of marginally higher average quality. There may indeed be statistical merit to this, but this analysis overlooks the effect of the enlarged disorganised mass. From our 45 million or so native Brits, very few today fit the bill of a right-wing elite. Whilst, of course, much of the problem here is the propagandistic efforts of the state, I don't see how increasing the number from 45 million to 90 million would do us much good, especially not in the state our country is currently in. If we don't believe that 45 million Brits is enough already, then just how much further are we willing to take things? I do not believe it to be in our interest to have the blob of the English nation to double or triple in size, all for some daft notion of demographics being destiny. The average family, which sends their children to schools operated by the state in adherence with the official lies of the state, to, at best, only ever tilt at state-funded windmills, likely does very little service to the development of a new right-wing elite by having more kids than they're suited to. Yes, quality can always be found in such dark places, but at such a cost of resources that it may not be worthwhile. Realistically speaking, the true right's resources are very limited, which is the very problem we're trying to overcome. It would not make sense for our guys to bring 6 children into the world when it's already a struggle just to afford a place to live. Even less so for the average ignorant masses to do the same. As Harry says here, for young men who are disenfranchised and impoverished, telling them to reduce their quality of life is not the message they need to hear. Young men need purposeful action and a productive goal to work towards. As such, given our circumstances, dedicating our resources and time to small families may be the more beneficial approach. There is also the matter of clanship. As I talked about in my video, True Right-Wing Loyalty Explained, the ideal societal structure of the true right, which is Darwinian in nature, is the clan, the greatly extended family. In the interest of developing our own clans, it would be faster to have more children. A clan whose members have 6 children per couple grows much faster than one whose members have 2 or 3. Again, there is merit to this argument, but there is still the problem of resources and the matter of quality. It's far easier to keep 8 grandchildren provisioned and in good stead than 36. With these numbers, any wealth you might have had will be horrifically diluted to the point where you may as well have had no wealth at all. This is in part why I suspect that wealthier nations do tend to have fewer children. A growing populace makes more sense when prosperity is growing, but in a declining nation such as our own, I'd argue that the reverse is true. Unless you can put your children to work, they consume an incredibly high quantity of resources until they reach adulthood, where they can at last become productive. And unless the wealth held by the younger generations will become significantly more than that held by the older generations, having loads of kids simply is not economically sustainable. Even then, the demand on national resources and infrastructure can become their own issues. The idea of supporting the old with a far larger generation of the new is nothing short of a pyramid scheme. At some point, and under certain conditions, i.e. literally right now, you simply cannot keep going on. In my opinion, as someone who believes that we are in a period of civilisational decay, wherein things will get worse, not better, having unsustainably high numbers of children is simply asking for trouble. All said, the record of history, from the Industrial Revolution to the current state of American politics, shows clearly that demographics, whilst playing some role in the destiny of a nation, do not set things in stone. A well-organised minority can and will always come out ahead of a disorganised majority. The political power of the Jewish diaspora in America is proof positive that this is the case. As for hyper-natalism, much of the theory is built on a Blairite fabrication, though there is still some merit to the idea. Having loads of kids might be in the short to medium term interest of the state, but I do not think it's sustainable or wise, nor does it address the problems we face. Those who believe in a coming civilisational collapse should avoid creating a mass of new mouths to feed. If you do have the means to have many children, then go ahead, but I would not recommend this policy to the masses, given the bleak reality we are in. In the meantime, we need to gain power for ourselves by organising, improving and fostering new elites of the highest quality. This is the priority. In my opinion, sustainably creating descendants of higher quality is the better way to do this. To that effect, whilst I don't wish to set some iron law for all to follow, my instinct tells me that a manageable family of 2 to 3 children would be what's best for us. Live within your means and give your children guidance of the highest quality possible. That's what we should do. Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting. Clearly, I've snuck 2 topics into one here, pro-natalism/hyper-natalism and the idea that demographics are destiny. I'm happy that the demographics are destiny question has been answered, but my mind is still not totally made up about whether right-wing elites should have loads of kids or not, though my instinct errs on the side that we should not. In any case, I'm happy to hear what you think about the matter. Otherwise, channel membership is available, buy it now. Like, subscribe, and remember the phrase, non refert quam multos, sed quam bonos habeas. It doesn't matter how many you have, but how good.